So now we've got a couple of items that a bunch of people are here for. So let's take a matter out of order and let's go to item 10. Madam Clerk, would you read item 10 into the record?
An ordinance and amendment of Chapter 16, Offenses and Miscellaneous Provisions, Article 2, entitled Discrimination of the Code of Ordinances of the City of Providence by amending Section 16-54, Definition of Terms 16-55, Unlawful Housing Practices 16-63, Function and Duties of Commission 16-64, Powers of Commission, and 1665, Certification of Bona Fide Qualifications.
Okay. Who are the sponsors of this matter? Would anyone like to speak? Councilwoman Miller?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairwoman.
Could you help us explain what this ordinance is about, what it does, what your intention is?
Absolutely. So, for me, and I also want to recognize that Senator Metz and Representative Williams have been working on statewide legislation. Now, this will be the 5th year that they introduce it. And what it does is, for me, it's really about basic equity, right? So we know that we have a housing crisis here in Providence. We know we have a housing crisis statewide. We know that access to affordable and safe homes are increasingly out of reach for our neighbors, for ourselves in many cases. And so this proposal is a modest piece in that puzzle, but it makes a really big impact on the individuals who are affected. So I just want to say what it does is it takes the burden off for people who are dependent on child support, Social Security, SSI, medical assistance, veterans assistance, and the Federal Housing Choice Voucher program. So it says that those sources of income be treated like any other income by landlords. And so Connecticut has had this law on the books since 1989, the state of Massachusetts since 2006, many cities of Massachusetts for many years, longer than that, like I believe Cambridge for more than 40 years at this point. And one thing, so there's been a lot of conversation, and I don't want to de-emphasize that this covers a broad number of people, and a few of us heard right before tonight, that it covers SSI, and it covers veterans, and it covers a lot. But the conversation, the sort of pinpoint of the conversation has been around Section 8 vouchers, so I'd like to take a second to address that piece of it, and make really clear what the ordinance does not do. So it does not take away any of the tools that a landlord has to find a suitable tenant. So someone who's going to be a partner in making making sure that the quality of life at that property stays excellent. Someone who, so any screening processes that a landlord has in place, including credit check, referral, income check, interviews, right? And any of the ways that a landlord currently screens a tenant. This law does not change that. All it does is it says that you cannot turn away a prospective tenant solely for the reason of having one of these forms of income. And I just want to say, so I got some facts from the Providence Housing Authority. They've been really good partners in this, and they are the administrators of the program here in Providence. They've been meeting with tenants and neighborhood associations for several months, so since we introduced this back in March. And so there's a few things to know. So we're at, according to them, and I have a few things to submit to y'all, but we're at about 94% utilization rate. So that means that 94% of the people in Providence who have vouchers are using them in Providence, and that's really good news. But I think there's some information underneath that number. So just under 50%, so I think it's 48.3% of those housing voucher holders, it's concentrated in 5 neighborhoods. So that's in decreasing order of the number of vouchers. That's Elmwood, that's the West End, Upper South Providence, Wanskuck, Lower South Providence. So that's the first thing, and I think that's a really important item to consider when we talk about housing choice. So we're talking about, and I have an item here that is from PHA that's called Section 8 Distribution, and it gives you a number of units. I'd like to share it with the committee.
Okay, give it to the clerk, please.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. And I do have copies for everyone as well.
Just please give it to the clerk and then distribute it.
Okay, there you go. Thank you.
You might want to keep one of these.
I think I have 6. Thank you. And so these numbers give you a sense of...
Okay, before we discuss it,
thank
let's
you.
pass it out.
I could use one.
It'll be on our open meetings portal tomorrow.
Okay, so let's enter this as an exhibit so that we can talk about it. This is Section 8 unit distribution. Let's call this, Madam Clerk, Exhibit B. May I have a motion? Councilman, motion made by Vice Chair Castillo, seconded by Councilman Narducci. Make this Exhibit B. All in favor?
Aye.
I have it. Okay.
So this is...
Please continue.
Thank you very much.
Councilwoman.
So these numbers include what folks in Housing World call court outs. So those are folks who have Providence vouchers outside of the city. So if we remove those numbers, we've got 2,058 vouchers within the city of Providence, and that doesn't count project-based, where the voucher stays with the unit. Of those, I already gave you the breakdown of the 50% in 5 neighborhoods. 53, so that's 2.6%, are in 6 neighborhoods on the east side. And I don't want to get super into the weeds on
No,
PHA,
please go right ahead.
especially without
what
Peter there.
we're talking about.
There is a slightly higher amount of money that will be reimbursed if you're on the east side neighborhood to the landlord. So I just want to make that clear. We're not talking about one static rental unit across the city, but so 53 of the vouchers, that's 2.6, are in neighborhoods on the east side. 80% of those east side vouchers are in Mount Hope. And then fewer than 1 out of every 200 of the tenant-based vouchers in Providence are in Hope, Wayland, College Hill, Blackstone, and Fox Point combined. So, that really for me gets to this idea of equity and choice, right? And so that's just point 1 on what we're talking about when we talk about that high utilization rate, which again is great, and other cities don't enjoy such high utilization rate. The second, and Madam Clerk, this is another item for you. Sorry. Thank you.
Okay, this is everybody have it?
Yes.
Okay, this is a memo from the Providence Housing Authority from Peter Easton to interested parties. Peter Easton is the Director of Strategy and Development, dated June 4, 2019. And I'm sure Councilwoman Miller will explain this, but let's enter this as Exhibit C.
Motion made to enter as Exhibit C.
Motion made by Councilman Narducci, seconded by Councilwoman Vice Chair Castillo. All in favor?
Aye.
Ayes have it. Councilwoman Miller, please explain this Exhibit C.
Thank you. So this is a survey that PHA, the Providence Housing Authority, conducted among their tenants. And there's two big questions here. So the first I want to point everyone to is how long did it take you to rent a home once you began looking? And it says that 46% indicated that it took them less than 60 days, 33 that it took them more than 90 days, and 4%, so it's only 2 people in this survey, reported that they looked but didn't end up moving. So I want to point out that for voucher holders, what we're talking about folks who have waited on the waiting list almost entirely for many, many years. And once they have a voucher, they've got to find a home within 120 days, or they will more than likely lose it. So there's a few exceptions to that, like if someone has a severe disability, there's exceptions to the 120 days. But so this is a system where folks have 120 days to find a place, and it's taking people a long time. The second question is how many landlords did you contact before you were able to find a home to rent? 45 respondents answered, and it ranges from 1 to 70, which is one respondent said that it took them, they called 70 landlords before they found a place to rent, right? And so the vast majority, 38%, 17 of the 45, talk to 10 landlords or more. And then the final question that is really at the heart of what we're talking about, and again, I'm talking about Section 8 because that is the public conversation. There are many other really important programs covered by this ordinance. But again, we're talking about Section 8 right this second. Did any landlord not rent you a home because of your housing voucher? And we have 61% of the people who responded said that yes, the landlord said no to them because they held a voucher. So that, I think, these are, important things to take into consideration when we look at that high utilization number. We're not saying that it's easy, right? And again, I do think this is a modest proposal, right? I think that we're really closing a policy loophole here. But the impact for individuals is tremendous, right? We're talking about someone who, again, had to contact 70 landlords before they found a home. And then I have, Madam Clerk, one final thing I want to submit, which is a letter from Cecile Vega, who lived in Olneyville. Thank you.
Okay, so we have a letter dated December 30th, to whom it may concern, from Cecile Vega of Providence. Councilwoman Miller would like to enter this as exhibit. Let's call it Exhibit D. May I have a motion? So made by Vice Chair Castillo, seconded by Councilman Narducci. All in favor? Aye. Ayes have it. We have Exhibit E. Could you kindly explain this letter?
Yes, so this is written by Cecile Vega, who lived on Bowden Street in January 6th of 2018. Her house was destroyed in a fire. And she wrote a letter about how hard, after that trauma of losing her home in a fire, how hard it was to then have to search for an apartment, and how many landlords turned her away, and just that sort of physical, mental, and emotional toll it took on her. So again, this is just one story. I think, between the numbers that I shared tonight and the story, and the stories of many people in this room today, I think we have a really strong case to make that if we can do better, we should. That this is again a modest a way that we can do better. I do have some minor amendments to propose, but I'll stop there for now.
Okay. Any other committee member like to speak on this matter? Councilman Narducci?
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I think at this point in time, I would like to hear from our policy advisors. And I guess maybe even from the law department, as far as with this particular item, do we have the legal authority first to make sure that this gets enforced? Because what I don't want to do is pass an ordinance like other ordinances and it's not enforced. So I guess that part of the question would be for the law department, and the other part of my question would be for our policy people themselves. And forgive me because I did not get a chance to read all of this because I asked personal issues with my family, but has our policy people reviewed it? What is your thoughts on it?
Councilman, can we just hold on that, because there's a number of people that are in the audience that need to be heard before we go there. I've spoken with some committee members. They too want to talk about the ordinance itself. I heard that you may have an amendment, so we've got a lot to talk about tonight, and I'd like not to stifle that discussion. So is there any other, if I may, Councilman, is there any other committee member who would like to speak? I know that there are at the table other sponsors. Would you like to speak on?
Madam Chair, I am a sponsor, but I'd much rather hear some more from the people who have came here tonight. I know folks are here, they're very passionate about it, and in all things we have to learn before we move forward. I think Councilman Nakduchi started with a little bit of that, but we're learning about this ordinance. One more thing I want to say, this ordinance went into the ordinance committee in March 21st, 2019. There has not been any action around, energy where there have been a push to learn more about it or to understand it better. So want to hear from folks, and then I think for the major sponsor, for the sponsor and I'm a co-sponsor, to have some things that may be questions.
Thank you, Councilwoman Harris. Is there anyone, any other sponsors at the table that would like to speak about this before I open it up to the audience? Council President?
Thank you. So I'm one of the sponsors, and also, just like Councilwoman Harris said, we would like to hear from some of the community members that came to testify tonight. So I would like to wait until the community members speak.
Thank you for speaking on that. You're waiving your speaking?
No, I'm waiving my speaking for now.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so let's go to, we have some other elected officials in the room that I'd like to go to next. And that would be, we have Senator Metz and Rep. Williams. Senator, could you grace us with your testimony for or against this ordinance?
Yes, I certainly appreciate.
If you'd like to take a seat, you certainly can.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's been an honor for me, on behalf of our community, for me to be a co-companion legislation with Representative Lee. But you did such a great job presenting, I'm going to have to bring you up to testify before our community. I'm going to be very brief. The hardest thing for all of us is those calls that we get at night from families that are being evicted, or someone that can't get a house and they have their children and they're stressed out, they don't know where to go. Those are heart-wrenching calls that I receive. And then when you have to wait 18 months on the testimony, if I remember correctly, first of all, to get on the list. And then once you get on the list, if you don't use it in so many days, as Councilwoman Miller explained, then you lose it. And these are people that need housing for their families. And so in brevity, in his opening remarks at the General Assembly in the Senate last week, Senate President Ruggiero made a commitment for this legislation. So it's going. He said we're going to pass it on the Senate side, and hopefully this is the year that it goes through. And but I certainly want to thank you, the sponsor, and all the co-sponsors for this excellent piece of legislation, because we really have to help people. And this discrimination is ridiculous. People are so bold; they'll put on the email or whatever when you put online. They'll put that right online. Some testimony we heard was Section 8 need not apply, and that's we can't allow that type of discrimination. But thank you so much for allowing me to speak, and I appreciate the opportunity, and I hope it passes the committee.
Senator, before you leave us, just for the benefit of everyone in the room as well as the committee, what is the travel of the legislation? First of all, is this what's before us a mirror of what you folks are working on up at the State House? Is it the exact same?
It's the same issue.
Same language?
I don't know about the language, I haven't seen it, but I imagine it is.
Can the sponsors attest to that? It's the same piece that we're looking at, that they're looking at?
The intent is, but not exactly word for word.
Okay, so we need a language check. Okay. Is there anything else from a travel of legislative work up on the Hill that you want to share with us? What happens? It'll get introduced, it'll go to committee, you'll have more testimony?
Yes, it'll be open to the, we'll have more testimony in committee, similar to what, very similar to what you're doing here, the process. And then, of course, it has to pass both sides. Okay. And then go before the governor, either to approve, to let it go through governor's signature, or to veto. Yes, veto.
Perfect. Thank you. I just wanted to have everyone be at the same level of understanding of the process. Thank you. Any other questions for Councilwoman Kerwin?
Hi, Senator. Thank you for being here. I had a question. As I understood, It did pass the Senate last year, is that correct? It did pass, and it didn't pass in the House.
Yeah, we have to work on both sides. So the advocates have been, they have another community advocates who they're working with legislators on both sides to make sure that we can get it through.
But did it pass last year in the Senate?
Yes.
Oh, and do you know how many sponsors it had in the House?
No, I wouldn't know that offhand. I had a good sum on my phone was on my desk at the State House.
Senator, so even though it passed last year, you have to reintroduce it,
Yes.
go through the committee process and open it up
Yes.
for testimony and work it through your
Work it
Senate.
through again, yes.
Okay, awesome. Anybody else in the committee or council people have any questions of Senator Metz? Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Senator
I
Metz, for
appreciate the
taking time to
opportunity.
come here
Thank
and speak on this important topic. Okay, so Rep. Williams, could you kindly step forward? I understand this item is near and dear to your heart.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Yes, I am the original sponsor of the bill on the House side. And it certainly is a situation where all of us are looking for solutions and be part of a solution to a continuous, heartfelt problem that we're facing with housing. Homelessness, unless you're in it, you don't really relate to it. You can sometimes sympathize with those that are affected, but you know, it's not your problem per se. This ordinance is an ordinance in the right direction. So I think the collaboration and the cooperation from both city and state would be a great thing. It's a start. There's a lot of work to be done. There's changes that we can be part of, positive changes that we can be part of and make this happen. But again, we have to work together. It is our hope that this bill on the state side doesn't get hijacked like it got last year. I hope that there's going to be more communication, and I welcome each and every one of you as my colleague in government to come up and voice your interest and support for this on behalf of your constituency and the people who it affects. Homelessness is not a good thing. Everybody has the right to have a home. And just to think, sometimes the idea of having children out there without having a decent place to sleep, it's just a conversation for some, but it's a reality for most. And again, like I said, unless you're in it, you don't really know that, understand or care about the impact that it has. But it's real. And it's 2020, and I think everybody is ready for change. Everybody is ready for doing the right thing. And I believe that we can. And I say we should. So this is more a common sense thing to do, and all of us together can make this happen, not only here on the city side, because it affects many other cities and towns in the entire state of Rhode Island, but on the state side. Right now, our bill on the state will be introduced, submitted, and we will get a date for hearing. So I'll ask you please to be very alert to when that date gets posted. I invite each and every one of you to come, testify, each one reach one, and come up. This will be an opportunity to doing what is right for those who need our help. And this is the year to get it right for them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. When did you introduce this first?
First time was 4 years ago.
4 years ago.
Yes, this will be the fifth time.
Fifth time, okay. And do you have any co-sponsors up there in the House this year?
Yeah, I generally do one individual, that would be myself, the power of one sometimes supersedes the power of 1,000. Because what I have found is people sign on, but when it's time to fight, they're far and few between. So if you're committed, it doesn't matter how many is on there. It's about getting the job done. So the most I get on a bill is either 1 or the maximum would be 5. And in this instant, I have 5.
Okay. And the travel through your legislative process is the same as the Senate, same as in the council. It gets introduced, goes through committee, you hear testimony, and then it gets out to the floor, hopefully, at some point.
Before it gets on the floor, that's where the work begins.
Right.
Then we have to have everyone advocate there to the legislature, that being the speaker, that being the Mr. President, that being other elected officials of the committee that we assign to, and just in general, because we have to be aware that everybody, if it makes the floor, the 75 of us will be voting on it. So it would be a great thing to touch bases with everyone.
Okay. And I asked Senator Metz about the language. Is the language of the Senate bill the same as the House bill? Are there differences? And if there are differences, why are there differences? I know you were the lead sponsor. You introduced it 4 years ago. I'm just wondering, has the language changed over time?
The language have changed over time to compromise with individuals that were in support or in opposition. However, this last bill, everybody seems to have been on board, even the realtors, which is a good thing. However, there is some current communication going on with Rhode Island Housing that we'll be meeting sometime within the next week or two to see if we are going to push the same language or we're going to stay and resubmit the same exact thing. Like I said, I already have my signatures on mine ready, so I got the call and so I put a halt on it. But there's a possibility that we may tweak it somewhat or we may not.
So, do you have any knowledge of utilization ratios of the Housing Choice Voucher statewide? I know we had testimony from our Councilwoman Miller relative to the Providence Housing Authority's utilization ratio being close to 100%. What is the statewide utilization ratio?
It's probably similar, but I don't have all that data with me.
Okay,
but
I was just wondering.
Yes, they'll provide it to us just as they have done in the past.
Okay. Do you have any, since you were the lead sponsor, do you have any historical reference that you can provide this committee for discussion of how this emerged? We're not the first state to discuss source of income legislation. Do you have any knowledge of when source of income housing legislation began, in what states, why, what was, I mean, oftentimes we all, my committee members and council folks know that when we do our work or create legislation, it's about trying to solve policy problems or create good policy or correct a wrong. So do you have anything that you could share with this committee that speaks to the genesis, if you will, of this type of legislation in other states or municipalities?
Okay, just a bit of Councilwoman Miller mentioned the 2 states that acted on it, which I believe one was Connecticut in 1989, and 2006 in Massachusetts. But this situation with housing discrimination goes beyond 1989. It's been a situation, an issue that has impacted repeatedly family and people of color, poor people and people of color in the urban communities and beyond. But it was falling on deaf ears. And then, you have advocates that were strong enough and fed up enough to stand up together and make a change. And that's when it happened first in Connecticut and then Massachusetts. So there are other cities and states that are looking into it. Of course, their priorities supersede that particular issue. But here in Rhode Island, it has been beyond out of control. And now we are being heard because the homelessness population is increasing by the day. The lack of housing, affordable housing, is increasing. So it's time for us to make a change for the better. It's time for us to look at reality as it doesn't affect us per se individually, but it's affecting individuals out in our neighborhoods. So we need to address that situation as these other states have done.
Thank you. Committee members, anyone else have questions for the good rep?
I would think
Councilman Narducci.
it would be helpful that if maybe we, as the ordinance committee members, can get a copy of what you guys have drawn up and are looking to pass along with what the Senate has already passed. Is that something available to us?
Yes, but remember that this year, the numbers will be different than last year. That's one. And two, if the language is going to be tweaked, it'll be different than what's already been, it hasn't been introduced. I'm not sure if Senator Metz has introduced this on the Senate side. So it may change. So the language will be different than for this year as it was last year. Or it may be the same, but the numbers will be changed.
The reason why I'm asking the rep is that if we're going to be asked by our communities to support what our reps and senators are doing, and same to you guys to support what we're doing as the council, it would be nice to see actually what we're supporting before our 24, if you know what I mean.
And I understand exactly what you're saying, but understand this, which is the simplest and the most powerful information that we can disseminate to our constituency. We are here with you and for you. Discrimination pertaining to housing, affordable housing, is at its end. We are making a change, and the change is as follows. There's an ordinance that's being presented on the City Council, and there's a legislation on the House and the Senate that is being presented on behalf of everyone who's dealt with and is having this hardship. So the intricate part of it, I understand that we must understand it before supporting it, but our constituents, see, for the most part, when you give them a document, they may read it and may not quite fully understand it. So you can bring it down to layman's term and give them 3 lines and they're good for it, as long as they know that you're going to be working on their behalf.
Rep, can I ask you, what is the enforcement contemplated in the House version of this bill?
The enforcement, well, there's not a lot of penalties because we don't want to discourage landlords either. We want to make sure that they feel comfortable, that they're not being punished or forced to do something that they're not comfortable in doing. So we're not looking to penalize anyone as far as enforcement is concerned against any landlord at this time.
But is there an enforcement agency that's been set up at the state level?
No.
So that's still something...
Good faith with the hopes that people are going to do the right thing.
Okay. I know you're not at the table, Senator, but is that the same on the enforcement question? Is that the same on the Senate side?
Yes, and certainly the state's human rights commission.
Okay. Oh. Anything else? Any council people like to ask the good rep any other questions? Everybody's all set. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you for your work up at the State House. That goes to Senator Metz as well. We know personally how hard the work you do is, and we appreciate the work that you do.
Well, we need this year as well as you've come.
Okay, so now we want to open it up. Oh, let the record reflect that I see our Councilwoman Nerva of Fortune is here. Okay, audience is who would like to speak on this matter, and if I could ask that if there are groups here to speak on, that they could identify a representative that would carry their thoughts on, so that we don't have to be here all night. So who would like to speak first? Okay, I see a hand over here. and then why don't you come on in, sir? You can sit at the table there and introduce yourself for the record, please.
My name is Noel Sanchez. I'm a landlord and also a member of the WB&A board. And so I wanted to make some comments as a landlord that we have utilized the voucher program in one of our apartments. And to say that the hardship, that is not really a hardship, it's more complying with the existing laws about the inspections and the condition of the apartment being suitable. There is a few layers of inspections that are added because of using a voucher tenant. But then on the other hand, we get some support from the organization that provides the voucher, and also they're responsible for helping maintain the timeliness of the payments. So as a landlord, I haven't found it as a difficulty in my apartment building that I use. And I know that in the neighborhood, we've been working to try to open up other apartments to private landlords and encouraging them to use the voucher programs that are available. That's really all I have to say.
Do you have the support that you need from the housing agencies in the city of Providence and the state of Rhode Island?
I'm a landlord. We found our support really with the case manager that the tenant had in their agency. I'm not sure exactly, at an apartment through the Kent County.
Do you have the education about the voucher? How will you utilize it? What your challenges might be? Do you have good support resource, I guess?
I have people that can ask questions, yes, if that's what you're...
That's mine.
Yeah, so we know how, we've been renting for a good many years, and so we're able to find the help we can get.
Any questions, committee members? Council members? Council member.
Well, I'd like to
Espinal, please.
sit right next to Mr. Noel. I've sort of become a landlord myself too, and take the opportunity. Any other landlords here? Oh, good. Well, I've been a landlord since 1994, and a great number of my tenants have been on Section 8. And it has been a great experience. I think it's good business. I have not had a problem, just like you have not. It runs smooth. There is a support system within the Housing Authority. I think there's a lot of misconceptions out there in regard to Section 8 tenants. It's a good program. Tenants are very good. They adhere to the guidelines in the program. They don't want to lose their vouchers because there is language in there that if they break that, they find themselves losing their program, losing their vouchers. So you'll find that for the most part, tenants on Section 8 are well behaved. They know the rules, they know the guidelines, and they are cooperative. And to me, it's been a great experience. I find that it's good business, it's safe, it's secure, and I'm always open to Section 8 tenants. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other council members? Okay, great. Thank you very much for your testimony. Up next, I had identified you as our second presenter. If you could kindly state your name and address and organization.
I am the Executive Director of the Rhode Island Coalition for the Homeless, and I have some written testimony here in addition to the oral that I'll give. I don't know if I'm allowed to pass that out or... so
the clerk takes care of us all.
Yeah. Thank you, Councilwoman Ryan, Councilwoman Miller, and I want to say thank you also to Senator Metz and Rep. Williams, who have done a really nice job in presenting today this ordinance, which we are...
Just 1 second, Caitlin, I'm sorry. I just want to accept this so that we can talk about it. Okay, so everybody has it? Committee members, may I have a motion to make this, and I am lost, Exhibit E. Motion made by Vice Chair Castillo, seconded by Councilwoman Harris. All in favor? Aye. Motion made. Okay. I'm sorry I interrupted you.
No, that's okay. As I mentioned, I'm the Executive Director of the Rhode Island Coalition for the Homeless, and we want to do a crazy thing, which is end homelessness in our community.
Good for you.
Obviously a big part.
Thank you for your work.
Yeah, thank you. It's the city of Providence. So on any given night, there are about 1,100 Rhode Islanders that are experiencing homelessness. And those are the Rhode Islanders that we know about because they're in in shelter, or maybe they've engaged with a street outreach worker, but so many more are living out in encampments in just places, maybe they're doubled up, that we don't see. They're going to school, they're working, they're serving us our cup of coffee, and really what this is about is, as many have mentioned before, is really ending discrimination. So imagine that you have struggled, you've maybe been in a family shelter, you finally get a housing voucher or something that's going to assist you, and then you can't find a unit. So it's a little bit like somebody has bought you a car and you can't get the keys, right? How are you going to fulfill this dream of, you know, having a home, having a place to call home without a place to do it? And so that's why this is so important, because it really ensures that you as a tenant you're able to access. And in the city of Providence in particular, the income that you would need to afford a unit is, as a family for a 2-bedroom, is over $70,000. So it doesn't take a mathematician to learn that that doesn't equate, that is not what the average city of Providence resident is making. And to afford, you know, for just to know, an average renter in Rhode Island makes $33,000, $35,000, and then when we look at those experiencing homelessness, it's even less. So about a third of my families that are experiencing homelessness in our state have incomes between $6,000 and $12,000 a year. So the way that we end homelessness is through housing, and those housing resources that we get need to be in our communities with our landlords. And so this is really allowing for that to happen. And as I think others have spoken, it's really about, you know, trying to kind of close some of the loopholes that allow discrimination to occur in our communities. And particularly in homelessness, we see an overrepresentation of persons of color. So let's say, you know, African Americans make up 15% nationally of our population. We see anywhere from 30 to 40% of that in our homeless population. So that's more than double. So what's happening there? And then they can't get into housing. This is another way to discriminate when people will say, oh, we don't want Section 8, we don't want SNAP, we don't want those benefits. So I think this is really about equality and access, and it allows the money that this city is investing, that the state is investing in resources, to be utilized and to not sit unutilized because we can't find a unit.
So when you, I'm sorry, are you done?
Yes.
So when you talk about these instances of discrimination, do you document them? Do you have a catalog of your experiences that this committee could?
I don't believe, because the income discrimination it's not part of a protected class, I don't believe that there's a central documentation, like a central way. I know that certainly, so one of the nice things about the homeless system is we do have a fair amount of data. So anytime someone, for instance, enters a shelter, receives support from the service, they're tracked in a database, a statewide database that the coalition oversees. And so there's an opportunity there, at least with those who are experiencing homelessness, to potentially ask those questions and be able to track and understand the data. But I think because this hasn't been a protected right, that the majority of it is anecdotal or is probably specific to an organization might keep a tally. Certainly we at the coalition keep track of every complaint, grievance, phone call that comes in, so I have our internal numbers, but I think...
Would you be willing to share that data? Because that helps legislators.
Yeah, we'd be happy. I can have conversations with Miller about some of the information that we get in, certainly removing any identifying information. But like I said, I think the majority of, I think the best way to understand this is to go on Craigslist, Trulia, or any place where you're going to find an apartment. I think that is how you were going to see this. Or talk to any of the number of people that are looking for housing, or go and try to find it yourself. I think that is the way that you see this, and a lot of ways that discrimination and racism happens in our community is it's insidious. It's kind of in the cracks, and it's there and you feel it, but it's sometimes very difficult to document it for any number of reasons.
So could you explain a little bit more? You say go on Craigslist and look,
so I think
it's present.
if you were to
explain that a bit.
Yeah, so if you were to look for an apartment on any of the major websites, or even honestly Facebook is another big one where people are posting a lot of apartments, especially at current range. Like if you're looking for a 3-bedroom on the east side, you're probably not going to see Section 8 there because the rent's going to be $3,000 a month, right? So that those landlords probably don't need to say no Section 8 because they're not going to get those tenants applying necessarily. I could be wrong. But I think if you were to look at a certain, maybe try and think about a family that's only making $20,000, $25,000 a year, 2-bedroom, what can they afford? You probably want a 2-bedroom for $750, $800, $1,000, $1,200, somewhere in that range. So see what apartments are available, and then when you start to look at maybe even a little bit higher than that, you're going to see no Section 8, no voucher, no subsidy. You will see landlords indicating in their ads that they don't want people with this type of assistance. And so that's exactly what the point of this is, right? We don't want to hand somebody, say, we bought you a car, but no, you can't drive it, you don't get the keys. So that's really, I think, what this is about, ensuring access and ending the discrimination that exists in really any housing search site that you might go on, with the exception probably of Rhode Island Housing. I would imagine theirs doesn't have this problem. They probably won't let it happen, but I think, yeah, just look on Craigslist.
Committee members, any questions? Councilwoman Harris.
Yes, you said on Craigslist, they actually list that no Section 8.
Yep, 100%.
With this ordinance, how do we hold them accountable?
Well,
and what is, how do we enforce and hold them accountable?
So I think whenever passing an ordinance or just thinking about a rule, I look to what are places where we're legislating something similar already. So we have fair housing requirements nationally. They don't protect against this, unfortunately, but for instance, you can't say no blacks in an ad. Well, you can say it, but there are enforcement mechanisms for that. So I would encourage the council and committee and all of us to look to those. What are those procedures? How is that? And with majority of discrimination cases, the way, probably even outside housing, the way that it comes about is people experience the discrimination and report it, and then there's an investigation and usually some sort of corrective action. So you're not going to be in everybody's tenant screening room every day. Like, that's an unreasonable expectation, but what you can do is pass ordinances that provide rights to people that they should have. You educate the community about that, and then your community in a way becomes an enforcement when you have that vehicle to then go and report the issue to. So, like I said, I'm not an expert in fair housing necessarily, implementation, but I think you look to those resources and then see what we can model here and kind of take from those best practices. But really it's about clear rights and having a community that understands it, and then your constituents can then become, in a way, enforcers.
Councilwoman Miller.
Madam Chair, thank you so much, Caitlin. I just want to also add for other councilors here that I do have some information, some work that the Human Relations Committee, the HRC director before she left drafted. So there are some proposals about how we would enforce that as a city. I just want to make sure we know that when we can talk about it.
Wonderful. Any other questions?
May I follow up?
Councilwoman Harris, please.
And this is just for a clarification. Did you say that you have 100 people with 100 vouchers?
So on any given night, we have 1,100 people experiencing homelessness. The source of vouchers, rental assistance, really come from any number of places: state funding, federal funding, city funding. So I don't necessarily at this moment can tell you how many we have. I mean, I know, for instance, our coordinated entry system at the organization that I run, we match make those experiencing homelessness with resources that are dedicated to those who are homeless, right? So we're kind of that intermediary. And usually we have anywhere from 25 to 50 either vouchers or rental assistance or whatever that's being given out any month. And then what happens is you kind of get a backlog. So, right, you've got each month people are being assigned those vouchers, and then it takes so long to find a unit that you end up having these people stay in shelter or stay on the streets longer than they need to because we can't find the units, you know, the landlords that are willing to rent to us. And I shouldn't say to us, to the clients that then have that assistance.
Thank you. Committee members, anybody? Council members? Oh, Councilwoman Miller.
Thank you, Chair.
Just to thank you, Caitlin, for just testifying and speaking about the issue around housing here. I think one of the things to think about as we look at this ordinance is that minoritized communities face layers and layers and layers of barriers when it comes to housing. So people face barriers if they are people of color, if they are impoverished, so they might not have access to certain financial resources, if they have a voucher. But this source of income legislation is to prevent discrimination from any source of income. So whether it's a voucher for Section 8, whether it's you're receiving funding or any type of like Social Security or whatever, what it does is prevents any landlord from discriminating against you because you might not have like a traditional salary. And I think that we need to think about like the housing crisis. Our state does not invest a lot of money. I think we invest less than $8 per person on housing, on permanent housing, where you have the state of Massachusetts invest about $99 per person. And they have their share of issues because it's not permanent housing, so it's the right to shelter, so they'll give them emergency shelter. But we know that statistics shows us the impact of not having access to housing, which is a human right. And so when you don't have access to housing, there's a strong correlation between housing and health. There's a strong correlation between housing and education. There's a strong correlation between housing and crime. So when people have a safe place to live, then you see a reduction in crime. You see people that are more healthy, people who are able to work. You see kids that are going to school consistently. I'll share a personal story. When I first moved to Providence, I applied, I sent out an application for an apartment, sent my deposit. I was told that the apartment was ready, etc. I come to Providence before I moved to meet the person, and I'm told when the person sees me, because they didn't see me over the phone or via internet, they told me that the apartment was no longer available, or that the owner was thinking about selling. And I'm like, well, I just spoke to you a few days ago. I sent you a deposit. They have my deposit. So I have a source of income, and I was discriminated against. So think about the many people who have to rely on other sources of income, plus they fall within the poverty lines, and they're people of color, or they're immigrants, or they're within the LGBTQ community. So this is a catalyst to eventually influence our other cities to pass legislation so that people have access to a basic right, which is housing. And so if we already know, and there's studies that show that there are layers of barriers that prevent people from having access to housing, and it's very hard to quantify that data. I mean, no one's going to say, oh yeah, I discriminated against someone because they have a voucher. They're not going to say that. If we have a piece of legislation that prevents that from happening, then if someone doesn't follow the law, then we could have better data to show who's being discriminated against, because there's a law in place that prevents that from happening. And we'll see more people having access to housing. Plus, there'll be more initiatives to develop affordable housing opportunities. But we have to start somewhere. So if we know that there's studies that show these various forms of barriers, we have an opportunity to reduce an additional barrier that prevents families from having access to housing. Families, and which also includes veterans, people who lost their flock, or they're ill because of the sacrifice that they made for our country. They also fall in this category. So it's important that we pass a legislation that prevents another layer of barrier that prevents people from having access to
Thank you, Councilwoman. Thank you very much. Do you have anything else you want to say?
Can I hire her?
Anyone else? Who else would like to speak?
Thank you, Kaylee.
Yes, sir. Please identify yourself for the record and join us.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Malcolm Mills. I am the Vice Chair of DARE, Direct Action for Rights and Equality. I'm also a member of their tenant and homeowners association. And I have a story of my own. For a year and a half, when I had my son here, we tried to move back here to Providence. And for a year and a half, I run into things like, okay, I know when you go to some places there's going to be a waiting list or whatever, so we check them first and we move on to to regular landlords. And once I mentioned that I had a Section 8 voucher, the landlord just turned me down and said, no, we don't accept Section 8. That wasn't in the ad, or it wasn't on the sheet, you know, that I got to look. This happened over and over again. So the last one I asked, well, why don't you accept Section 8? And they try to give me some story about it costs too much. It costs too much to fix the house up. Well, what are you doing? Are you renting rat traps or what? Because the thing is, there is a code that you have to have a house up to certain standards before you can rent it. So if your house is not up to certain standards, it's not up to the housing code, what are you renting it for? Why are you renting it? How can you rent that and get away with it? A lot of folks won't call code enforcement because they're scared the landlord's going to put them out. Well, you're going to have to put me out because I will definitely call. I got no problem with that. And I have called. And we got a problem here in Rhode Island with code enforcement, because they claim they don't have enough folks to check or to come back out and check. Well, if you check a place first, you know you have to follow up. You understand? I'm a veteran, so I get money from the VA. I've worked most of my life, so I get money from Social Security, and I have a Section 8 voucher. So I cover three of the things, or three of the areas, you know what I'm saying, that landlords are discriminating against. And that's what it is, plain and simple. It's discrimination, and it's racially motivated. You know what I'm saying? We've heard the statistics. They're there. I'm somebody who went through that, and I'm not the only one. Like I said, I volunteer for DARE. We hear these stories all the time. You know what I'm saying? We hear these stories all the time, but there's not a whole lot we can do about that because there's nothing on the books. Putting this on the books, having the Human Relations Commission back that and enforce that would be the best thing for this city and for this state. We have a housing crisis where there is not enough housing to begin with. So if you got legal tenure that you can use to pay rent, why should someone turn you down? Like it's been said, housing should be a fundamental right for everybody. And it should not be, and no one should be turned down if you have the money to pay. There is nothing that hurts, and I mean nothing that hurts, that when you have a job or when you have money and you still can't get someplace to live. Think about that for a minute. You know what I'm saying? Think about that for a minute. Let that sink in. Because that's what I went through earlier in my life here. I was homeless for 6 years at one time. I don't never want to go back to that again. And I'm fighting and clawing, doing everything that I can to keep from going back to that. Councilman, I want to thank you very much for your comments and the fact that you rent to Section 8 voucher holders and you haven't had any problems. This is the misconception. You know what I'm saying? That if you have somebody from Section 8, they're going to tear your house up. Well, if you don't fix your house or bring it up to code, ain't nothing for them to tear up. It's already tore up. So I mean, like, let's do something that makes common sense. We're talking about housing people. We're talking about housing families. So why turn them down if they have a legal means, to pay you? It doesn't make sense. And if anybody can make sense of that, please, I'm sitting here right now, tell me, because I like to hear it.
Thank you. Any questions, Councilwoman Miller?
Malcolm brought up a really good point about the responsibility of code enforcement going in and the responsibility of these houses getting, not only code enforcement, but the responsibility of these houses getting inspected in time. How long did it take you, once you got your Section 8 voucher, to move in the tenant's apartment and be able to get there without waiting forever for them to inspect under the federal law, of what federal law calls for an inspection?
Okay, I was living on the 3rd floor. After I got hurt, I had to get off the 3rd floor because I was on crutches. It took me about a month before I found my next apartment. When I found my next apartment, there is a form that you give to the landlord with the rules and regulations. They fill that out and send that back to the Section 8 office. I go and tell the Section 8 office, this is the apartment that I found, this apartment that I would like. Within a week, they're going to have someone out there to inspect that apartment. Now, depending on the landlord and how long they take to fix what the inspectors say they have to fix, that's how long it takes. You know what I'm saying? If the inspectors say, well, you have to fix this railing, you got to put in some windows or whatever, as soon as they get that done, call the Section 8 officers and show them that they have that done, they'll be back out there to inspect again. You know what I'm saying? And if it's before 30 days, they can be called. They don't have to wait a whole 30 days in order for them, in order for a Section 8 officer to come back out and inspect. That is not true. I've been through it a few times. That is not true at all. So it's up to the landlord how long it's going to take them to get approved for Section 8.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Thank you very much. Anyone else? Committee members? Council members? Okay, next up, who do we have? Please.
Do you want me to go down there?
You can stay right where you are.
I have my own seat, so I'm good. and I'm high enough so everybody can see me, so I'm good. I just wanted to talk really quickly.
Can you please just identify
Oh, I'm sorry.
yourself
My name is
for the
Tina
record?
Pedersen. I run my own foundation called RAMP about accessibility and inclusion. And I just wanted to talk about the piece of that everybody seems to leave out is the accessibility piece. There are a lot of foundations, there are a lot of organizations, there's a lot of people out there who will pay to do the modifications for the wheelchairs, for the walkers, for everything. All we need is the landlords to agree to keep it for 5 to 10 years, whatever the organization has, but no one seems to want to take on that piece. And there is a lot of homeless. We just donated a whole bunch of manual wheelchairs, walkers, and canes. I would say 72 of them we just donated to the homeless population who are out on the street, who uses an assistive device, who have no place to go because they just can't get in. We can't go to places during the day around the city of Providence a lot because we can't get in. We can't even find a place to call our home that we can access and we can get in because nobody will make the modifications. Like where I get a lot, and this sounds very bad, is we don't accept your kind. Well, I don't know what my kind is because my legs don't work, but my mouth sure does. And I'm not shy by any means. But we just need to make sure that we're taking on the accessibility piece as well, because there is a lot of people who, we are all one accident, one surgery, or one diagnosis away from being in this. I walked into a surgery 5 years ago and took a stroke to my spinal cord and woke up with no use of my legs. I, like that, ended up disabled from an active person to disabled in no time flat. This could happen to anybody. That we need to have housing that accepts us You know, they tell me that I should go to a manor. I'm 46 years old. My children still live with me. They don't want to go live in a manor. I don't want to go live in a manor. I got too big of a mouth and my TV runs too high to live in a manor, so let's be honest. But we need to think of the accessibility piece because it's a piece that no one seems to talk about. It's a piece that no one seems to bring up. But I just donated 72 assistive devices to our homeless population who need the accessibility to have a home. And if everybody deserves the right to have a home, so do we. And we need to get in and we need to be able to access it. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you for your comments. Thank you for being here. And your organization again was?
It's called RAMP, Real Access Motivates Progress.
Awesome. And have you reached out to the landlords?
I have reached out to, actually, I live in a house. I've been renting my house when I became disabled, and now that I became disabled, it took a grace of God. It took almost 3 years to talk my landlord into letting me put a removable ramp out in front of my house because he thought it would ruin the ambiance. It's a ramp. It's not a big deal. It makes a slide for the kids, so it's good.
And then the Landlord Association in Providence, have you reached out to them?
I have reached out to them, and like I said, there are organizations. I can give them all of the organizations, the construction companies that are willing to work with them. Most of it is paid for. They just have to agree to it. But again, it's discrimination that they just don't want to take that on.
Thank you. Committee members, any questions? Council members? Okay, next up, who would like to speak? Please join us. Please identify yourself, your name, your organization, address, whatever you want to tell us.
Good afternoon. My name is David Felice. I'm a policy advocate for Progressive Latino. We advocate and support immigrant communities and communities of color all over the state. Thank you, Councilwoman Miller, for introducing this and for the rest of the committee. We've supported the bill at the State House for a couple of years, and I think I just want to echo some of the comments that were made. For us, it's about ending discrimination, but discrimination that a lot of people already feel and a lot already experience in many different ways, whether they're an immigrant, whether they're a person of color. The people that we serve, our constituents, are already struggling to find housing. We don't need to create other barriers for them. I think the statistics that we felt were important to mention were that almost half of Rhode Islanders spend about 30% on their rent. That number jumps to 80 when it comes to communities of color, 80%. I myself spent more than 30% on my rent. We want to make sure that everyone who is looking for housing is allowed that right. Also, one thing that I heard that I want to mention is that this is a no-brainer. This is one of those issues when I talk to people about it, they're like, I can't believe that's legal. You know, you're always saying like, we're working on a bill that will stop discrimination for if you have Section 8. They're like, oh wait, that's not a thing already. So we want to come here tonight to support this ordinance and to thank everyone who's working on it, for Home for Rhode Island and DARE and everyone who came out, because we want to make sure that we end discrimination for the people of Rhode Island. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions, committee members, council members? Thank you.
Thank God. Thank you.
They're not that bad. Anyone else would like to speak tonight on this topic?
Behind you.
Please jump right in. I think I know you. Please identify yourself for the record.
Good evening, I'm Jean Lamb. I'm the Executive Director of the Smith Hill Community Development Corporation in the Smith Hill neighborhood of Providence. And I am here asking your support in moving forward on this ordinance. We have been doing affordable housing development for more than 28 years. And more than half of our properties either utilize vouchers or project-based vouchers. And we find that not only do they help the families, the lowest of low-income families, find affordable housing, but it creates quality affordable housing. If you do not have landlords, as Malcolm was saying, who do not want to rent, it's because they don't want the inspectors coming in. And as he mentioned, those apartments often are not up to code, and people and families, young children are living in lead-ridden homes or homes that might not have proper heating and ventilation. So I do want to ask that you support this ordinance, and beyond that, and I haven't had a chance to read the full ordinance, another source of discrimination is the application fees. Our residents, our community members who often make less than $20,000 a year have to pay $75 to $100 for each application, and often once they fill, the landlord will not take an application without that fee. If someone is living on an extremely low income, $75 each application is a huge barrier to accessing housing. So that's it. I just wanted to...
What is the cost of pulling a soft credit report? Because that's why they're charging. That's their justification for charging, correct?
Correct.
What does it cost, do you know?
I do not know.
Okay, all right. Committee members, any questions? Of Ms. Lamb? Council members? Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Jean. Thank you for coming and thank you for your testimony. I don't think there's anyone else. Does anyone else speak now? Forever hold your peace. Please. Please identify yourself for the record.
Good afternoon. I'm Wendy Thomas, and I am kind of on the other side of it. I am in permanent supportive housing at this point, and waiting for my moving out voucher, which is one of the several vouchers, different types of vouchers. But the way it's looking with landlords discriminating against people who have those vouchers, what good is it going to do me once I get one? I have volunteered with the homeless population for the last 10 years. I've heard many stories of people having to turn their vouchers back in for one reason or another. Most of the time because they cannot find a unit. I'm also 60 years old. I do not qualify for most of the high-rises because they are 62 and over. They used to be 55. I don't know when it changed, but anyway. I'm on the waiting list. I've been on since the new waiting list started. The centralized waiting list started in November of 2017. They do not give us a number where we are on those lists. So how long am I going to sit there? If these vouchers aren't moving, how long are we going to sit there and wait?
Excuse me, you said if the vouchers aren't moving?
Yeah, but people aren't getting units, then vouchers just are not moving.
Okay.
If they can't get people into units, then other people can't get vouchers. There was a thing today about Reed getting us another $7.3 million, which is community care. I understand that. But what good is it when we don't have landlords that will take the vouchers?
Okay.
It's a great asset to give us more vouchers, but if we don't have landlords and buildings that will take these vouchers, it's not going to help.
Any questions for the committee? Council members? Thank you. Okay, is that everybody? We have one more person. Okay, and then we're going to try to move along.
Thank you, Chairwoman. My name is Katie West. I'm from the Housing Network of Rhode Island. We're a nonprofit membership association for nonprofit community development corporations. We have 7 members in Providence. Smith Hill is one of them. I'm not going to repeat the wonderful points that we've heard from landlords, people who have experienced discrimination, and many other eloquent comments. I did want to respectfully submit our written letter of support on behalf of our organization for the committee. And I also have a letter from the Rhode Island Coalition Against Domestic Violence. Do you have a copy for every committee member? I believe for that there's 10, so committee and some other counselors.
Okay.
That's it.
Thank you. Okay, great. So let's just enter these into the record. Okay, so we have two items. We're going to call it, we have a letter dated January 13th from the Housing Network in support of the ordinance. We're going to call that Exhibit F. May I have a motion to do so? What is it?
Sorry.
We have, ooh, I was right. Motion made by Councilwoman Castillo, seconded by Councilwoman Harris, making this letter Exhibit F. And then we have Rhode Island Coalition Against Domestic Violence letter in support of the ordinance dated January 13th. This is going to be G. May Councilwoman Castillo makes that motion, seconded by Councilwoman Narducci. Okay, so we have these two matters into the record. Okay, we heard some very interesting testimony. Didn't hear a lot from landlords tonight, which I would be interested in getting the other side of the perspective. I would like to go right now. Thank you, Councilman Narducci, for raising this. We wanted to know what our legal team thought of this ordinance. We heard from the state side of this equation that they haven't, we haven't matched language in these ordinances or these bills. So can you tell us where we're at from that perspective? Have you had an opportunity to review this? First, if you could kindly identify yourself for the record.
Certainly. So, Sean Bouchard, I'm the Director of Policy for the City Council of Providence. I have had an opportunity to review briefly the proposed language with the Solicitor's Office, and we are in the process of coordinating that review to make sure that I think everybody can agree the intent is extremely clear and it's been articulated very well this evening. The point that we're, as a team, working on right now is making sure that there's teeth and enforceability and that this backs up the intention that has been stated. And so we're currently working on that. That is an ongoing process in terms of the review. And I do believe, my understanding is there's additional amendments that I have not seen, but I'm happy to incorporate those as well into any review that we do. The other point I did want to make in terms of the state Senate and House bills that are to be presented, our office will be coordinating closely to make sure that we're not only tracking those bills, but making them available to council members for your review, and making sure that if there's any testimony needed from the council side, that we're able to coordinate that at the time. So,
great. Okay. And Solicitor, would you echo those comments? 100%. So you two are working together?
That is correct.
That's great. Councilman Narducci.
If I may, too, I think after hearing the young lady's testimony about accessibility, I think that should be an amendment also added to this particular ordinance too. Why we're doing it, why not add in the accessibility of the handicapped individuals that are trying to get into housing? Like she was saying, she was saying about what she had to go through to put up a ramp at a house she already lived in because the landlord didn't want to see the ramp and because it didn't make his house beautiful. I mean,
Well, I'll leave that up to you. Would you like to respond to that? It appears to be contemplated in here.
That's correct. The existing ordinance already does speak to accessibility for individuals with disabilities.
I was practicing law again.
Yeah, so my understanding is that is already on the books. This proposal is simply related to the source of the
first underlined section. It defines disability. So do we have an amendment, like Karen, that you want to
Yes, Madam Chair.
tonight?
And so there are two minor amendments that come out of the Solicitor's Office many months ago at this point. So one of them, we give 6 months from the point of passage to enact legislation. And the other creates a private right of action. So when we talk about enforcement, and then I have this other separate piece that the Human Relations Commission of the city began a process to think about how we could enforce this thing. So again, these are all processes in motion. So the two amendments are to give a window after passage. So it wouldn't
Do you have an amended version?
I do have an amended version.
Do you have copies for everyone?
I do have copies for everyone.
Great. Madam Clerk, thank you kindly distribute those. Is this red line? Yes, it is. Okay, first order of business. May I have a motion to accept the, this document? So it's clerk 10A, correct?
Yes, 10A.
Made by Councilwoman Harris, seconded by Castillo and Narducci. Okay, so we have an amended version, and Councilwoman Miller has already provided testimony that the amendments on page 4. Sorry, the first one is on page 4. Do you want to go through it quickly, Councilwoman?
Sure.
It looks like it's an enforcement action.
Yep. At the very bottom of page 4, so what it does is it says that an individual can bring a civil action to court for appropriate relief, which we didn't have in there before. And then it defines appropriate relief, meaning damages for injury or loss caused by each violation of the ordinance, including but not limited to permanent, temporary injunction, punitive damage, right? So then it defines what relief could mean. And then it's also saying that because when we wrote this ordinance, we gave it a home with the Human Relations Commission. It's also saying that any action that the Human Relations Commission or the city itself takes, that doesn't negate an individual's right to then seek their own punitive damages in court. And the second change is one tiny half of a sentence at the very end of page 6, section 7, that says this ordinance shall take effect 6 months after passage.
And that's it?
That's it.
Solicitor, Madam Solicitor, have you had the opportunity to review this amended version?
So I do remember a few months ago, March or something.
Yeah, this is a while back.
Yeah, that I was asked to draft language, but I hadn't done the review as to whether or not, what would this look like? Is this something that actually would be upheld, challenged in court? That type of analysis. And I'm happy to do that analysis and provide a memo really to the city.
Okay, based on what we've heard this evening, which I thought was great testimony, I want to thank everyone who is still here in the room that provided that testimony. I think it was a great exercise. Certainly learned a lot of information. I've heard that the solicitor's office, as well as our policy director, wants the opportunity to look at the language a little bit more. We want to make sure that we're in step with the state, the Senate and the House, and that we're moving forward together, and we put our best foot forward. Based on that,
Madam Chair, thank you for just setting the stage. One of the things that came to thought as well, and I also sit on a PHA. And so not only does the PHA have vouchers, but Rhode Island Housing. And you heard Brett said that Rhode Island Housing is submitting some kind of language, I think, for them to sort of look at men or whatever. So I would like for us to understand what Rhode Island Housing, I just happen to know what PHA is doing because I'm a member of the board. And so it's a little different for Rhode Island Housing because for PHA is our big housing agent. For people who don't have one, that's where Rhode Island Housing, have housed these vouchers. And so I would like to know what they are also proposing as.
We can ask them to come.
Yeah, please.
Testify. I'd like to have the PHA here as well for testimony. Is there any other thoughts that you had, Councilor?
Not only PHA, but Rhode Island Housing too, who also have, who have decided to send some kind of language to, I guess, direct.
Okay. I wanted to wait until Councilwoman Harris was finished. Is that
shut me down?
How can anybody shut you down?
Is there anyone else you'd like to hear from?
Well, yeah, definitely because of, that was mentioned, in the meeting tonight, because I had no idea that Rhode Island Housing also have found an interest in this. And then I'll make a statement after.
Thank you. We have someone from Rhode Island Housing. Would you like to identify yourself and would you like to?
I'm from the Providence Housing Authority.
Please come up to the table so we can all hear you. Please identify yourself for the record.
I'm Vanessa Galarza. I'm the Associate Director of Lease Housing. We oversee the Section 8 program for the Providence Housing Authority.
From the Providence Housing
Providence
Authority.
Housing Authority. And if you guys had any questions, I just wanted to make myself available to answer them. I'm not going to add anything to the testimony.
I have one question. What's the utilization rate that you are aware of from Providence Housing?
For the Providence Housing Authority, we're about 94%. And I know you had asked a question about the statewide. We're about 85% statewide.
Okay. Anything else that you would like to share?
I think that this is just an opportunity for a lot of our tenants who do receive vouchers, can't even get their foot in the door. They don't get the opportunity to say, I'm a good tenant. I've been living in my previous apartment for 10 years, but I've been kicked out because they are going to put students in, or an owner bought it, they wanted to live there. These tenants, who mostly are elderly, by the way, are just not given the option. They can't find anything because they can't even get in.
So I have a question. We talked a lot about housing choice vouchers tonight and the experiences that folks have. Is that similar for people that are just trying to find housing and don't have a voucher? Is it a similar experience? Do you have any ability to speak to that?
I do not, because I have been within the Housing Choice Voucher program for about 15 years now, so we really just focused on that. As the largest landlord in the city of Providence, I can tell you that we do hear from tenants saying that they're finally able to afford a place to live. They move into our units, and you hear horror stories, but I can't directly testify and say that they're true, because we haven't been, or I have not been exposed to them.
I'm just wondering if it's a condition of the voucher discrimination that we've heard tonight, or it's also a condition of a shortage of housing in general. So, I mean, it's a comprehensive problem, I'm sure. It all feeds into each other.
Well, we partnered with the Rhode Island Coalition for the Homeless, and we made available 50 vouchers to homeless families. And the families were homeless, and a lot of them actually had sufficient income to support an apartment all on their own. They were just unsuccessful in finding an affordable unit. They can't get in.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for that testimony. Councilwoman
PHA actually started doing some, I guess what you would probably call education around PHA's vouchers and landlords. I know we hosted a meeting in our community at Southside Neighborhood Association, and so is this something that's new that PHA have done because of this issue that people cannot? Is this something new, and how is that working for your office?
We took a really long, hard look at the success rate for our tenants and the difficulty that they were having in finding units. And a lot of the times, what ended up happening was the landlords they just did not know. They knew someone who had heard something about someone who was a horrible Section 8 tenant, but they just didn't know what their rights were. They didn't understand the program, so we partnered with a lot of really great agencies like the West Broadway Neighborhood Association, Representative Williams, and in the East Side also with the representative. We went and we did presentations to landlords. Representative Miller, I believe, was part of one of them as well. And it was just an opportunity to reach out to landlords and debunk some of the myths. And that's what we're actually focusing on now. Because I think that once we were able to come in and speak to the landlords and they could ask you questions, they were a little bit more comfortable with the program and how it works. Because the truth is that we just provide a subsidy. The Section 8 tenant is just like any other tenant. The inspections are called minimum housing quality standards because they're actually below what code enforcement would normally require. And we only do them once every 2 years.
Do you have a requirement to educate the landlords as to what their obligations and duties are, or to just explain the program to new populations of landlords?
We do actually give the landlords information, and we do give them a list of the requirements of the program, and we brief them. But we're also just, as a standard policy for the Housing Authority, just to become a better partner, we're offering landlord education classes as well, like how to become successful at being a Section 8 landlord.
As part of your administrative plan, do you have landlord outreach defined as a requirement for to earn your administrative fees from what?
As part of the administrative plan, there is no landlord classes that are required. As part of our THA annual plan, meaning our goals, we have that already put in. We are actually working to make sure that that happens on a regular basis.
Okay. Could you share that with the policy director as well as the clerk? I'd like to see what your administrative plan specifies as well as your policy.
Sure, we can maybe give you the regulation.
That would be great. That would be good for us to have. Thank you. Thank you very much. Anyone else? Any other questions for our friend here? Oh, Clinton, please join us. Please state your name and title, organization for the record, please.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Clinton Nenny. I'm president of the Providence Apartment Association. So I just wanted to talk to everybody. I heard a lot of the different stories, the different updates and kind of information in regards to the housing statistics, how tenants have been throughout the city of Providence as well as Rhode Island. And I'm kind of on the other side somewhat of the perspective, not necessarily saying that's in disagreement with the premise itself. But for example, I've had Section 8 tenants in my homes, and unlike Pedro, I apologize to you, but my experience wasn't as good. So for me, it raises a little bit more of concerns of, while I hear a lot of positive stories and I do feel that the need is necessary, for me to maybe be more in agreement with how we move forward, I would like to, one, see more tangible data and proof that throughout history that the story has been a success. And also answer the questions that, is this specifically for a Section 8, for example, or other disability situation versus just a low income situation? Because to your point, if there's somebody who's working a 40-hour job and making $30,000 a year, do they have the same issue? Is it worse? Are they being discriminated against? So I'd like those questions to be answered in a way.
How do you get that information, Clinton?
You know, I'm not 100% sure, but I'm assuming if they have situations on people based on vouchers information, and that information for non-voucher tenants should be available as well, maybe through census as well.
Thank you.
As of 2016. Might be a source of information to explain those kind of statistics.
I interrupted you, I didn't mean to. Did you finish your thought there?
Yes.
Okay. Councilwoman Miller?
Yeah, Madam Chair, I'm so happy you raised that, because undoubtedly, yes, right? Like, we can all say, I think, everyone in this room can say, like, yes, people do not make enough money to afford housing and are struggling to find it across the board. So this ordinance absolutely won't, and that's why, for my part, I keep saying it's just a small piece of it. Right, it's just this one piece for folks who have vouchers. I don't think there's any claim that this is an overarching affordable housing ordinance. And I would love the council and my colleagues to take up some real work that digs into, okay, so is it okay for landlords to ask for income verification that well exceeds percentage-wise what the rent is, right? So that's a whole different thing that is definitely not on the table tonight. But I really want to thank you for raising that, because I think it's truly an important issue that the City Council needs to think about. I don't want to cut you off, but I do want to just do a few cleanup things also.
Actually, I want to hear from Clinton. You wanted to finish?
Yeah, sorry.
Please. I didn't want to interrupt him.
So I apologize if I
No.
may have lost this in my thinking, but just to kind of continue on where I was I think going forward for some of our next steps is we just need to, because based on a lot of what I hear today, if all of these statistics information is true, then a lot of landlords aren't against this. They won't discriminate against this. They will be very much on board with this. So I think one of the objectives would be to bring this information to landlords' attention. I'm the only landlord here, I think, other than Peter, that spoke to this. That maybe, okay, 3. Sorry, out of the room, or 45 people, right? So, maybe we need to even the numbers a little bit. And I'm sure that landlords don't only come in here thinking of, in disagreement, but wanting to learn more about what's happening here today, and then have a better opinion and raise questions that may really grow the discussion. To a point where everybody's on the same page, and they're not only doing this out of maybe any form of coercion, but they're on board and maybe even pushing the initiative to get it done.
Thank you very much. Any other questions for Council President?
Clinton, have you had any conversation with the Providence Housing Authority? They're willing to go and educate the landlords?
I have actually. So this is similar to what our conversation was about. And again, I'm not saying anything here that probably maybe even hasn't been heard by other people. But I think it's a very important step to be made just for both sides of Providence to be in agreement on how to push it forward.
Clinton, have you had that same discussion and have you partnered or worked with Rhode Island Housing as well?
I actually just until now was not aware that Rhode Island Housing was involved in this as well. So I'm looking forward to it as well as if most people in the room.
So just for everybody's edifications, Providence Housing Authority manages the vouchers for Providence, and there are other local housing. Boy, you're in tough shape, huh? There are other local agencies that manage vouchers. That manage vouchers. If a municipality doesn't have a public housing authority, Rhode Island Housing is the designated housing provider, housing voucher provider. So that's kind of why they wear the hat of the entire state, likely in this question for us. So thank you very much. Do you have any other thoughts that you'd like to share with us? No? Okay. Any committee members? Committee members? Any questions from committee members? Council members? I see Councilwoman Fortune is in the back. What would you like to share?
Clinton, thank you, and I agree that it's important to when we're putting legislative policies together, it's important that it's driven by data. But do you think that it's the question is how would we collect quantitative data to show that people aren't necessarily being discriminated against in terms of like the housing vouchers? Because if we know that they shouldn't, and I just don't see a landlord checking off a box to say, yes, I discriminated against someone because they had a housing voucher. So that would be quite difficult to quantify. And a lot of that information is based on qualitative data. So if there's statistics that are showing us that people with vouchers do not have access to housing, so what it's proving is that there's a correlation between vouchers and lack of access to affordable housing. And so I'm not sure if you can explain how would we quantify discrimination.
I believe as of 2018 there were 23 cases filed for discrimination. Mm-hmm. One way would be to file cases. Mm-hmm. If you feel that you've been discriminated against, put it on record. Mm-hmm. And another way is go over the application process and take a copy of the application. Mm-hmm. Show how you filled out the application, mm-hmm. present it as a source of information, and then people can kind of put it together. Mm-hmm. And I would recommend this for any person looking for a home. Mm-hmm. So even if you don't have accessible information, to go over any information that you fill out for documentation purposes, to hold on to or a copy of it, so that when you present it, then this data can be gathered if there isn't already a way of doing so already to get this. That's what I would do for sure going forward. Mm-hmm. As of now, we never use issues like a census, like just local data have gathered for tenants looking for income to get information that can bring the correlation together. It's not going to be necessarily a one-step process. It's going to be a multi-step process to get this information.
Thank you. So I guess with filing a lawsuit, the problem with filing a lawsuit is that if you require a voucher or you're on a fixed income and you receive any types of subsidies for housing, it would be an extreme challenge to hire legal representation. And public defenders are already at their wit's end. So you don't even know if you would necessarily get appropriate legal representation who's an expert in housing to even represent you. And plus, a lot of people within minoritized communities there are several barriers which include language, it might include transportation to get to a court date, etc. So that's time. So I don't know if that can actually provide an accurate analysis of the issue at hand. So that's one. And two, in terms of the census, again, I don't know how the census would necessarily quantify discrimination against housing, because that's not one of the goals of the census.
Well, when I look at the language barriers and things like that, court issues, I just see that as an additional source of income problem. That's a problem for properties. So while it is a problem, sure, and it's a problem that we should all look at, but there are different layers to solving that problem. We shouldn't just, in my opinion, single out to yes, this way. So yes, there needs to be better sources of information for lawyer contacts for people who face this problem and whatever that they have been discriminated against. But I think that's people of all mental statuses.
Okay, anybody else questions? Councilwoman Kerwin?
I just want to add a few things. One of the things we just spoke about was, going to court. But if it's not against the law right now, we can't even have a conversation about, getting a lawyer or going to court, because frankly, right now it's not illegal. And, I was thinking about a few other things as folks were testifying. I think that something that David from Progressive Latino said that really, really is relevant to this conversation we're having right now is that he can't believe that this isn't already legal. And the fact of the matter is, what we're doing is we're allowing this status quo, is allowing poor people, frankly, to be discriminated against. And we're talking about not having enough data. But I think Councilwoman Miller brought some really, really strong data. She told us that the majority of folks who do have vouchers in Providence, they take more than 90 days or more to access housing. And, that's almost at the limit. That's almost at the cutoff. We know that, this is a statewide statistic, but we know that over 70% of landlords that were surveyed, they refuse to even grant an application to Section 8 voucher holders. So that's some statewide data, but it's still relevant to the conversation. And then, I think what is the hardest part about this conversation is the fact that Rhode Island is in the dust here. Massachusetts, Connecticut, New York, Vermont, New Jersey, Maine. These states all do this, and that's embarrassing for us as a state. And in Providence, I like to think we're progressive. I like to think that we're leading the way, that we're bringing the state of Rhode Island with us, because we have some great minds. We have a great city. We're a world-class city, really, and we should be at the forefront of this. And as we're waiting for the state to pass this the bill, which I really hope they inevitably do, we need to do this. The fact that our Northeast neighbors were an outlier, that's troubling. Think about people wanting to move here and access housing here. We're not attractive for a lot of folks because we're not a city that's accessible in a lot of ways. And that's disappointing. So I think we gotta think about this long and hard, because we're really lagging behind here. And Rhode Islanders deserve better. We deserve to match our neighbors.
So to that point, in regards to Massachusetts versus Rhode Island, it's pretty close in percentages. But if you go to Boston, to Providence specifically, Providence actually has a higher voucher usage rate than Boston.
I would just like to say, in response to my colleague, that in Clinton, you just mentioned the difference in utilization. This SOI ordinance nationally came about to address poor utilization rates for vouchers. We have a high utilization rate for Providence Housing Authority. 94% is very, very impressive. When I called over and asked what it was, I was told it was almost 100%. The state is not that high, and work needs to be done there. It's not an embarrassment at all. The reality is we have a housing shortage, and all of those things put pressure on the challenges of getting safe, affordable, and decent housing. This is one piece of it, it's one piece of the puzzle, but this SOI across the country introduced in the late 1989, 85, 2000, many states came on board to address the low utilization rate. As far as the legalities of someone who is discriminated against, that was covered way back in 1964 with the Fair Housing Act. Whether it's effective, but that applies to all federal programs. So when there is discrimination, it needs to be addressed, pointed out, and ferreted out. And any agency that manages housing vouchers has an obligation to make sure that their programs are run without discrimination. So that's a valid question, Councilwoman, and I think we need further discussion. It's getting late. We've talked a lot. We've had already an opinion from our legal eagles down there that they need more time to review. I think we need more discussion on this topic. Councilwoman Harris has asked for additional people to come in and talk on it. Can we have a motion?
I'd like to make a motion that we continue for further discussion and by all means support Councilwoman Miller to the best of our ability to make sure that she has the best bill there could possibly be. That means that we have to truly understand exactly the enforcement, whether we can actually do it. My thing is, like, I would hate to put out that this is it and only find out at the end that we didn't do what we were supposed to do. I only, in March, a little before March, I got a chance to see this ordinance downstairs. I asked the policy people, not the one that worked with you, what was her thought on it, has she seen it or whatever, and she wasn't able to give me a lot of information because we haven't had a chance to vet it. You have done a wonderful thing by identifying this. I would like for us to have the best. The reason I am so, and I don't want to go on and on, but Councilwoman, you remember the same thing with the plastic bags, although environmental justice is bad. If we don't educate our people, we don't do the right thing, what happens is we work against each other. And so there's a lot of things that's happening right now just from hearing, from the deliverance of our reps, our General Assembly. One of the things, Providence Housing is saying something in writing to them. What is it? We haven't seen it. We need to see what that is. Will it strengthen the bill? Will it lessen the bill or whatever? We need to be on top of it. And what's exciting about this particular thing is the fact that we have an opportunity to run foot to foot, arm to arm with the state and make sure that when we hit the ground with something. In all good intentions, there have been laws that have been put in place by politicians that we now are trying to reverse because we did not, it sounded good, and in all good intentions, people are suffering, especially people of color. I don't see how this would help anymore with some of the conversation and just listening to Councilwoman LaFortune talk about her skin color becoming a problem. She finally showed up and the landlord, knew that, she wasn't a person that they wanted in their establishment. So there's a lot of things that we need to make sure that we're putting out and being honest about it. I'd like to see PHA do more education. I'd like to see I'd like to see Rhode Island Housing start to do education with landlords and try to with that being said, I put a motion that we continue for further study, continue to work on this, work with Councilwoman Miller and the constant entertainment.
Thank you. Motion made by Councilwoman Harris.
Discrimination has been going on for many, many years. And the Italians went through it, the Irish went through it. Unfortunately, we're 300 years into it, and the word discrimination is still an issue, which I think is pathetic, to be honest with you. I don't think anybody should be discriminated against, regardless of what they're going to commit is. what color they are, where they come from. But again, I think the biggest problem we have, more than making sure nobody's discriminated against because of their income or other issues, reasons, is that we have a big time problem with housing period. We need to create housing. That's what we need to do.
Okay, we have a motion on the table. Do I have a second?
Can I just also make a very short statement before, thank you. So I would just also say that, thank you and thank all of everyone who came here tonight. I just want to say briefly, like, I encourage us, like, everything we need to for our colleagues to get what they need to know more about this issue and the impact of this legislation. But, we've heard from some people who made it pretty clear that this is happening now and now, right, and impacting people's lives now. And it's been happening for years.
Right.
And so, from my side,
tomorrow.
we can have a real role in impacting the state. Sure. We can have a real role in impacting people's lives. I would just urge my colleagues that we take this up soon.
Yeah, we will.
We have a motion on the table. Do I have a second?
Second.
Seconded by motion made by Harris, seconded by Narducci. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. We've continued it, and we want to get the information that was presented to us at the table or talked about, and then we'll get back around the table on this topic. Thank you all. Okay.
So what are we here for today?
We're here to present to the President of the Council the program and the policy from back from the brink, a call to prevent nuclear war. It entails these issues, and we want them to pass it in the council, have the city make a resolution.
A resolution
accepting these issues and sending it on to our delegation in Washington.
Right. And what group are you representing?
We represent Cox Christian Catholic Peace Fellowship.
Sure. I've taken pictures of people from your group doing stuff outside the federal building in the past as well. Yes. Yes.
So Sabina said they're going to give this to their policy team to look it over, speak to other council members with whom we have been in contact, and then inform us as to whether they're going to accept it. The East Providence City Council has accepted it, and they wrote a resolution, and it's in here early. East Providence City Council.
Do you mind if I see that?
Yeah.
Would you have an extra copy?
Not of that.
Not of that, but how about the first one?
An extra copy?
I'm sorry, I can take a picture of this.
City Council?
Yes. Oh, you do? Oh, all right. Here. Let's see. Okay. And excellent. Well, and what is your name again?
Raymond Tetro.
How do you spell that last name?
T-E-T-R-A-U-L-T.
Right, I asked.
This is Father Byrne.
Father Byrne?
Joan Crowder.
Hi. Okay. Hey, how you doing? Thank you very much for this.
Who do you work for?
I work for a group called Uprise Rhode Island. So we do a lot of work on stuff like this. Especially, I like to do the piece work when I can. It's very important.
Good, good.
This is great. Thank you very much for this. Thank you. Thank you for your time.